another one of these, right?
There we go.
And Jeannie, why don't you introduce yourself now? And go ahead, introduce yourself.
So I'm Jeanne Labozetta, and I have lived, as I said, on the East Side since 1996. Rob and I got married then. My husband is the cameraman, so he's behind the computer, and he's going to do some work on this. I have been involved with social services Pat, I used to work with people who have Down syndrome and autism. That's how I started my career. And I absolutely know what you mean about a love fest first thing in the morning when you see them. That's how I felt when I worked at Hope and in homes. I did therapy with families that were considering institutionalizing their children. And we only had that happen once in 2 years. Okay. I was very pleased with that. Yeah. And then I worked at Catholic Charities for a long time. So I've been part of this community since I went to college at Santa Clara and grew up in the East Los Angeles area. So I'm a East Side girl, I guess.
You're getting ingredients?
Yeah.
And I grew up in a town called Montebello and then came up here to go to school at Santa Clara and have been here ever since, except for 2 years in Montana when I worked up there.
Hey, Mom, where's your shopping list?
Somebody's got their.
So I'll make sure I add some more.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. I have been making these cookies since I was in 5th or 6th grade when one of my brothers went in the Marines and I sent him some cookies. And so what you have is a long history of experimenting different ways to make the cookies. And you'll see some of the equipment I use. As I said in my little paragraph, I've made them pretty much all over the country. I've made them in Chicago. I've made them in New York for family members and brought some of my equipment with me when I particularly made them in Chicago for my nephew's wedding, where they had my cookies instead of a wedding cake. I bring Sister Mary chocolate chip with me everywhere I go when I do that. So she blesses the cookies before. So she's making her appearance, but she's going to leave in a little bit. When I need the flour, which is in here. So I'm gonna warn you ahead of time that I will be leaving the mixer on while I'm making the dough because that's part of, apparently from what people have told me, what makes the ingredients work. We have a son who's a chef and he believes that what makes my cookies work is the order that I do things and how I do them. And again, it's just the way that I've developed it over the years, partially because I'm too lazy to turn the mixer off and on, but somehow that works. I have a sifter that I will mix the flour and the salt and the baking soda in. And I have a nutcracker that I've used. It is put together with tape because I've used it so much. You can add chopped nuts that you buy at the store pre-chopped, but mine are a little finer. I don't know if you can see how fine they are. And sometimes if I'm doing a lot of cookies, like for my nephew's wedding, I will chop them in the Cuisinart because I just need so many of them. All the ingredients that I've used, the eggs and the butter, have to be at room temperature beforehand. And the way that I test the butter is I sort of feel it to see if it's soft enough. In hot weather, I don't leave it out very long because it can get too soft and then the dough doesn't stick together as well. So this is pretty perfect. I put them out about an hour ago, I think, to prepare. I have the chips that I'm using today are Nestle's, and that's only because the white chocolate chip was on sale. And usually I buy my chocolate chips at Costco because they're cheaper in bulk and I make so many cookies. So you can really use any type of chips that you want. I created the mixed ones of the white and semi-sweet because I didn't have enough chocolate one day, but I had some of these. So I added them in and everybody liked them. So, but I have a family member who is sensitive to the whites, so she only gets pure chocolate. I've made them with dark chocolate, which Rob prefers dark chocolate. So you really can use any type of chips that you want. This is just my sort of standard. What I don't use are the chocolate chunks. What I've learned is the chocolate chunks spread too much and you don't have the chip. There's something when they make the little chips that they use to keep them in this form when you make cookies, I've learned, so that chunks don't work as well. And as for brands of flour or sugar or salt, it really is whatever you want. I just happen to have some brands today. My vanilla is from Costco. I just happen to have Arm & Hammer because I was at the store and that's what they had. But if I'm at Trader Joe's, I'll buy Trader Joe's because it's cheaper. And the same thing with the flour. Now, I use unbleached flour for my ingredients because I like it because it's a little, if you're gonna have cookies, you really shouldn't worry about health benefits, but I like it better. I have a friend who's physically gluten intolerant. It's not a preference. She has celiac disease. And she brought over her flour once after a party that we had at the dog park. And she wanted some cookies after everybody was oohing and ahhing over them. So she brought over her gluten-free flour and I made her cookies. And she said it was the first time she'd ever had cookies that tasted normal. Whoa, I just lost an earring. It's live. She said that they were really good. I did not try them, but I know since then they've come out with really some very well tested gluten-free flour now that you could probably use and see how it works. And I don't know if you have to adjust for ingredients. The other thing that I've learned, Darlene and I were talking about this earlier, that if you go to a place where there's high humidity, then you have a problem. You have to adjust the recipe. So when I went to Chicago to make them for my nephew's wedding, I did not adjust them because I made the cookies in a air-conditioned home, but I packaged them really well so that between the time that they went from the place where I made the cookies to the reception area, they didn't get affected by the humidity. And you can go on Google and figure that out. The same thing with altitude. You have to adjust the liquid, which is the eggs, and you have to adjust the rising mechanism, which is the baking soda. And so you have to do something around that, but generally I'm making cookies in my home, so I just make it California way. Those are the only real tips I have to say, other than as I make them, I'll give you a little bit more information. The other thing that's going to be a challenge is I keep the mixer going the whole time. So I'm going to have the camera turned away from the mixer so that you won't hear it as well. And my cameraman Rob is going to do that for me. But it will be noisy and I'll try to talk as loudly and enunciate as he told me I need to as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do, and any questions beforehand?
Yeah, you can put questions in the chat box, any of you, if you have any questions, and then I will ask Jeannie the questions. I'm going to add in something about the flour and the butter substitutes.
Okay.
I go to the fancy food show a lot, and there's a lot of great flour substitutes now, particularly from Bob's Red Mill.
Oh.
He has a lot of good substitute flours. And then there's a lot of substitutes for butter as well. That are I'm like Jeannie. If I'm gonna make cookies, I'm gonna use real butter and real sugar and real everything, you know, but I know some people don't like to do that. I'm under the same belief I think that she is. It's like, don't even eat cookies then. Like what is the point? Okay.
Like, why?
Yeah. But some people do have particular issues with dairy and things like that. Yeah. So there's some really good butter substitutes as well as cheese. We're not using cheese today, but there's some really good ones that have come out in the past year or two, just recently. Because prior to that, they didn't taste very good, to be honest with you, because I try them all the time. So there are some really good ones. And even if you don't want to use butter, you can use other things like bananas or other items too, applesauce and things like that, to use as a substitute for butter. So I'll put a link in the chat box of other butter substitutes. So go ahead.
Well, and I think, when I first started making cookies, when I had no money right out of college and right out of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps and being back in school to get a master's, I used the cheapest oleo that I could find. And people were fine with that. It wasn't until I had a little bit more money that I started putting the nicer ingredients in. So you can use whatever you want. And our son, the chef, said that at Apple, where he works, they use, for people that want a vegan diet, they use not New Balance, that's a tennis shoe, something about Earth Balance, I think it is. And he said that that's a really good one too. He was just telling me that the other night. So, all right, we're ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cream in this size of a bowl. I'm going to cream the butter, and I didn't unwrap it for two reasons. This is nice and soft. You can see it fell in. So I use these wrappers to grease the cookie sheets. So I never have to put extra money into this, but it's also better for the environment to use that. So it's 2 sticks of butter, and I will grease the cookie sheets afterwards. You'll know how much I use. And then I put in 3/4 white sugar, and then 3/4 of well-packed brown sugar. So I'm gonna actually pack it here rather than have it, brand new package. Have it packaged for you or pre-done for you, because I want you to see how well I pack it. This is always a challenge here. Okay. So, and I'm doing this on a piece of wax paper because things fall out and then I can just throw them in. And that's where I sift my flour onto the wax paper so that as the food is mixing, I can just put it in there gently. Okay, so I'm packing it down right now as firmly as I can. And that takes just a few seconds to do. And again, I use whatever brown sugar is on sale. So if it's a store brand, that's fine. This happened to be on sale when I got it. Okay, so it's well packed here, a little bit more. And then I scrape it, I don't know if you can see this. So I scrape it in here because that loosens it a little bit. And I pretty much put it, so it's more of a, less of a firm consistency in a block. And I think that helps so that it distributes the butter better, the butter and the sugar. And then I put it in, I have a stand-up KitchenAid mixer that is a workhorse. And I used to have, first I cooked them, did it by hand. And then I got a little bit more money and used a hand mixer. And then I got a little bit more money and had a different mixer. And then it died. And it was like losing a family member because I used it so much. But then I got the KitchenAid, and I'm really thankful because of the amount that I have, and because it's a, there it is. There you go. And I like it because it's sturdy, and I can make as many cookies as I want in one time. So a tradition in our family is at Thanksgiving, we have, in the old days when you could have a lot of family members there, every household gets a batch of my cookies. So one year I made 13 batches of cookies prior to going to Thanksgiving. So you can see you really need for that a powerful engine, and if you're going to make a lot. So right now I'm going to cream. Can you all hear me about this?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to turn it up a little more. I'm going to cream this while I'm sifting the flour and mixing the eggs. You want the creaming part to take a long time. to get it creamy. And the consistency should be so that you don't see the individual granules anymore of the sugars in there. So that's why I occupy myself with other things while I'm doing this.
Well, that's a great mixer for making tamales.
All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, and again, it's important to do this, according to our son, it's important to do these things in order. So the next thing I'm going to do is to crack the eggs. I get them at Costco. It's like an ad for Costco today. And it's 2 eggs at room temperature. And I use a whisk to beat them. And when I started out, I didn't have a whisk. My mother never had a whisk, and I didn't have a whisk. But when I got more money, I got a whisk. So I used that, but I always used a fork beforehand, which is fine. I think a whisk does a little bit better. And I whisk them until they're a little foamy. And that's sort of how I think about it. Not when they're like a light yellow. You know, some recipes say whisk it until it's light yellow, or you could be whisking forever doing that. So it's getting there. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to add the well-beaten eggs and the vanilla at the same time, and that's going to make your dough a little soupy, which is fine because once you put the flour mixture in it, it gets less soupy. So I'm going to turn it off right now. Oh, yay. And then put this in. Usually I have this turning while I'm adding this, but since we're live.
Can you show us inside the bowl? I mean, challenge your husband here. Oh, am I muted?
Okay, that's the bowl with the eggs in it.
There you go.
Whoop, sister has to leave. Whoa, it's dripping. So getting a little. But here's the beater, so you can see sort of the consistency right there. But it's going to be a little. Excuse me, I have to wipe off some of the egg stuff. It'll be a lot soupier later on. Okay. Okay. So you can hear it maybe with the sound, and you can turn the motor down once you've creamed it. When you want to cream the eggs and the butter, you want it at a higher mix. Okay, so then.
Jeannie, somebody asked, what setting is your mixer on?
What setting?
What setting? Is it on high, medium?
I put it on, this goes from 1 to 10, and I put it on about 6 for the creaming. For the creaming. See, that's really high, and that's the soupier. So that's a 6. But then I turn it down when I do this, and then I turn it down even lower when I'm adding the flour. Otherwise, it goes all over the place. Okay, so now I'm going to put the vanilla in, and I use a teaspoon for it, but I let it run over a little bit. I'm not real particular about that, even though my son says when you bake, you have to be really precise when you bake. It just gives it a little extra oomph. And so let me show you the consistency now. So see, it's, I guess it's not soupy, it's stewy, I guess. But it's, there it goes. See, it's flopping down, so it won't hold it together right now. This is the best part, is licking your fingers. So now I'm going to do the flour. And again, they tell you that when you bake, you should be very precise, and most baking shows show you to put the flour in. I'm going to put 2.5 cups of flour, and they say to do that, you should not dip it in, and you shouldn't shake it, and you should use a fork to level it off, or a knife. I don't do that for these. I do it for other things, but not for these. So it's a little maybe more than that. I don't know. So that's 2. 2.5.
I want to mention that she has her flour in a big jar there, because that keeps all the moss away. I'm guessing that's why you're doing it, because I put my flour in a container all the time too.
Jar that my mother had.
Yeah.
This is probably about, I don't know, 50, 60 years old. I don't know. But I used to put if I had moth problems, I would put a bay leaf in there, and that repels the moths. So you can do that in rice and in flour products.
Yeah.
That. Then I put in, well, look, I have a brand new package of.
So did you somebody asked if you put the vanilla in already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did.
And I think we should talk about vanilla, because people that are not bakers, there's a lot of cheap vanillas out there, or artificial vanillas. Do you want to talk about vanillas, or do you want me to talk about it?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of times when you're in the store, you have to look, because they sell artificial vanilla. Does not have the same flavor, and those are the cheaper, less expensive ones, including McCormick's and all that. They have artificial vanilla. And then they have vanilla flavoring, which means it's predominantly an alcohol base or some other type of base, and they put some vanilla in it. And then they have pure vanilla, and the pure vanilla is going to be a lot more expensive, but it has a lot more flavor. You cannot compare using pure vanilla. So if you're going to bake, I highly suggest you just invest in vanilla. And that's that's Costco, because of course Costco would have pure vanilla. But so you'll look at the label that it'll say 100% vanilla, pure vanilla, whatever. And then they have Madagascar vanilla, which is a particular region that is known for its vanilla. The vanilla is very flavorful. And there's Mexican vanilla that a lot of people get when they're in Mexico. Again, you need to look at all those vanillas that you're grabbing in Mexico, because a lot of them are not pure vanilla either. So you want to make sure and get good vanilla, because it makes a big difference in your flavors.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always used pure vanilla. And again, I buy this because I make a lot of cookies. I think if you don't, you probably just want to buy a smaller bottle of it, because it can lessen in quality as you work on it. But Costco has a good deal. The next thing I do is I'm going to sift together our dry ingredients. And I have one of the differences between the recipe that I use, which was handed down to me from my oldest sister's best friend, is there is more baking soda in this than that's on the back of the Toll House cookie or the chocolate chip cookie bag, and less salt. And I think there's a little bit more butter in there too, I think. I've been making these so long, I don't mess with it. So that's that. And then in salt, it's a ½ teaspoon of salt. All right, I'm going to turn the mixer on again just to keep, so we don't lose anything. And then I sift. This sifter also went to Chicago with me, as well as the cookie sheets. Well, I can't remember what else I brought with me. Okay, so that's that. And then here's the value of the wax paper. When I put the dry ingredients in, I just do this.
That's nice.
And it's still gonna go all over the place. Not too bad yet, but when I start putting more in, it'll go all over. And you'll see the consistency will get much chunkier as time goes on. I don't put it all in at once. I just sort of wiggle it in. That's a very formal cooking term, I think. And it just keeps going in. You can see my arm wiggle too. Now it's starting right around now, probably I'm about 3/4 of it in. It starts going around the area. So if you're gonna cook, you wanna make sure that you don't have too much free space around you that could go on the floor, which I've also done. If it goes in a big plop, it's not as fun. So. Almost there. And you got to hold the first part of it pretty well because that's easy to slip out of your hands. Okay. Oh, there's a big puff of flour. Okay, all done. All right, the next thing is, and then I start putting it on the first setting, Darlene, the slower setting. So we're almost there. And I just put the nuts in. And that's 3/4 of a cup. Now, this, as you can see, I've pre-measured the chips. I have a cup of white and the rest up to here, which is more than 2 cups. This is a very old Tupperware thing that wore off. So my niece suggested that I put a line here because this is what I use it primarily for how much the ratio should be. So when you put your chips in, you want the beater to go more slowly than fast because then the chips won't get beat up as much. So I just put them in, I whittled them in too.
But don't worry about the chips being part of the batter, because when I taught my friend to make chocolate chips, she was afraid to put the chips in the bowl like you're doing because she thought they were going to get broken up and mixed into the batter. You know,
Yeah.
and I'm like, no, they'll be fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Like the chips will fine.
We actually have a funny story. Rob was asking me about funny stories about my cookies, where I always put all the ingredients out so that as I use them, I usually put them away into the pantry or into their drawers that they belong in. And then I know that I've used them all. And sometimes if I'm distracted talking to people, I forget an ingredient. So I made all the batter, put the first cookie sheet into the oven, and I realized I hadn't put the vanilla in. So I immediately took the cookie sheet out of the oven, threw all the rest of that batter back in, and baking maybe for about a minute or so at the most. And it turned everything brown because the cookies were hot.
Oh, because it was already melted.
But my niece's husband said they were the best he liked. They were ugly as heck. They were like brown, but he loved them. And he's a firefighter. So the firefighters know how to cook and they're good. So
they know how to cook. Yes.
Yeah.
I've done a few meals at firefighter houses.
Yeah. He brings them. He wants to, well, I'll tell you a story about how he wants to make money off these.
Well, I want to say too, you beating, I've never beaten my cookies as long as you have. And I want to try that now. And it makes sense to me because when I'm making tamales and you beat the dough, it puts air into it. And when you put air into it, your masa comes out better with the tamales. And so I can see that probably all the air that's getting beat in there would make the texture of your cookies better.
Well, and I think that, a lot of baking shows say don't overbeat your flour ingredient like breads and things like that. And if I make homemade pasta.
I can understand breads, but cookies are different.
Yeah. So I don't know, this is just something I started as a kid. So it worked. But I think that my sister-in-law, Colleen, came up with that idea that's why she thinks it works. Okay.
So Jeanne, you have a question? White versus chocolate, about 60-40.
It's about 60-40%. Rob asked about the percentage of white to dark chocolate. And you could use, like sometimes, because Rob really likes dark chocolate, and that's what he got your dark chocolate.
I only like dark chocolate.
Yeah. These are semi-sweet, because that's what I grew up with.
Semi-sweet.
But I've used the dark chocolate, and that does well too. And I beat them as I'm mixing it until I can't see anymore. So that means that they've all been mixed in together. Okay, so I don't get all of the dough off of here because my cameraman gets a treat. And he gets to lick the beater. There you go, sweetie.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, that's great.
Now, okay. So one of the things that Rob said is, are you gonna keep usually all this stuff is put away, but it's live. So I'm gonna show you how I grease the sheets. So I just have the leftover butter. And I keep a baggie in the refrigerator of these if I don't need them right away, so that I have enough.
Great idea.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about my cookie sheets. These are the air pocket sheets. They were very popular about 30 years ago. That's how old these are.
Mhm.
And I used to cook on the cheapest, because I was poor, the cheapest ones that I had. And then I had a roommate who gave me these for Christmas or my birthday or something. And I was like, oh, you can't change the way I do things. This is my chocolate chip cookie. And then I started using them and I won't go back. My niece lives in New York City, and she lives in a really teeny tiny apartment with a really teeny tiny stove and kitchen. And she wanted me to make cookies for her friends at work because she's been making cookies and she thinks she's close to doing this, but she wanted them to taste the real things. Well, first of all, so this is lesson number one, always use fresh ingredients. She had very old baking soda and flour. And she had has a stove that doesn't have the sealant around it, that little fat thing, whatever.
A rubber thing.
Yeah, the rubber thing. And so getting the temperature right was a challenge. And she had very thin cookie sheets. And I burned the first set of cookies that I made. And then Rob came up with the idea of putting another cookie sheet under it. So we sort of had the air pocket thing. And that worked better, but they tasted awful because they were not fresh ingredients.
So can you tell me again what kind of cookie sheets those are? And I'll put a link in the chat box.
You know, these are so old that I actually went online after my experience in New York and bought her some of these. And I think I called them air pocket cookie sheets or something. And I'll go back, if I can look at my orders from Amazon, I'll go back and see if I can find them. It's been it's pre-COVID, so it was at least 2 years ago that I bought them. They're not really fat. I don't know if you can see, but they have this.
So they're called air baked cookie sheets.
Is that what they're called?
Well, that's what's coming up when I put in air pocket. Is air baked cookie sheets.
Okay, so this is a very scientific way that I do the figuring out. Now, I'm not a Mrs. Fields, so I don't use a scooper. I just take a big scoop and then I plop it down. Let's see if you can see.
Oh, we can see.
Okay, I can't see. There's a message right in the chat. Okay, and then this makes anywhere from 33 to 36 cookies. And on this size cookie sheet, I put 4 rows of dollops, I guess. And when I'm towards the end of the dough in the bowl, I don't have as good a mix of chips to dough. It's just the way it ends up. So then I end up robbing Peter to pay Paul on these and take some from some of the other dollops.
I do that too.
So this is about the size of the dollops. They make pretty good sized cookies. There. And I'm going to put this first one in I'm going to just go against what I just said that I was going to do, because I'm going to put some in the oven. I've preheated the oven at 350. Every oven is different. So in the recipe that I sent you, it says anywhere from 9 to 13 minutes. And it's really by look that I figure out whether they're done or not. And even my oven sometimes is inconsistent whether I need to do it at 13 minutes or 12 minutes, but I start with 13 for these in this oven. So I just put them in like that. The timer on. Oh. And then I wait, and so I'll scoop out the rest now so I can continue to talk. Now, if you were with my nieces, I taught them at a very young age how to make this. And my niece, Jeanne, the one who lives in New York, I think half the dough went into her mouth before it ever made to the cookie sheet. And for Christmas sometimes, or her birthday, I would just give her a thing of dough rather than cookies. And she was perfectly happy. So that is the fun part about making this, is their dough is good. Our grandson.
So they tell you not to eat cookie dough, but I don't listen to anybody.
Yeah. My eggs are pretty good. They're from Costco too.
Yeah.
So I think if you were leaving the dough out for a long time, you'd have to be careful about that with the eggs. It's primarily the eggs. Our grandson also loves to lick the bowl. He's at that age right now where he doesn't smile. But I caught him when I gave him the bowl last year. And he was smiling because he got the bowl. So, all right.
Well, Jeanne, you were telling me earlier about your making a bunch of cookies for somebody's wedding.
For my nephew's wedding in Chicago. And we made 360 cookies. So it was about 11 batches. And we made some, one other wedding that I did that they wanted cookies instead of a cake, was to have different types of mixes of chips, and then with or without nuts, because some people are allergic to nuts. And certainly want to be sensitive to that. So for that wedding, we had the couple, because they lived here in the Bay Area, we had them come to our house and do, like you have a cake tasting, we had a cookie tasting. And they chose then what mix they wanted, and with and without nuts. I'm just going to get a spatula, a rubber spatula, and get out the last of it, because we don't want to waste anything. And this is where I start robbing Peter to pay Paul, to put a little bit more chips in, because when you get to the bottom of the bowl like this, there's just not any chips left, or very few. So what's the use of having chocolate chip cookies without a chip or two?
Do you make any other variations?
Of cookies?
Well, chocolate chip cookies. Because I know I've added oatmeal in mine. I've added cinnamon sometimes. I do different stuff sometimes with my chocolate chip cookies.
I haven't, just with the different types of chips. But when I got this recipe as a young, I think it was 5th or 6th grade when I started making this. The recipe came from my sister's best friend's mother, Mary Burke was her name. And Ruth Burke was the recipe, and it had a little bit of lemon zest in it. And I've never made it with that, but you'd think, Darlene, that
you would think. So the joke is, I get all my lemons from Jeannie. She has like a orchard practically of lemons back in her backyard.
Anybody ever wants lemons, do not buy them. Call me up or email me.
And she has the best lemons. So I'm going to make a lemon meringue pie is my thing sometime in the end of February. And I will definitely get lemons from Jeannie, because her Meyer lemons, which is the only lemons I make my lemon meringue pie with, Hers are very tasty.
They are. We're very lucky.
Mhm.
So that's the cooking part of it. So what I'm going to tell you a little bit more about is after they come out, so we have about 9 more minutes. After they come out of the oven, I do not immediately take them off of the cookie sheet. I let them rest on the cookie sheet for about, I don't know, 7 to 8 minutes. You know, there's nothing scientific about it. And I have a spatula. This is, I probably have had this for a long time, about 50 years.
That's a nice.
It's a very narrow blade on it. And the reason I like it is it can really scoop the cookies off well. If I used a fatter blade, like a rubber spatula, it's not as clean taking them off. So, you know, some of it is the equipment I use, I think. And the other thing I do, once I do take them off, is I use a brown paper bag and to put them on. Now, some people will use a wire rack, and I don't do that. And so I just cut this up. Honey, can you get the scissors for me, please? I forgot. One thing I forgot putting out. So, thank you. He does more than be a cameraman. So I just cut it like this. And I use the inside of the bag because for some reason I think that's cleaner. You know, it's just a bag from the grocery store. And, you know, I use as many Trader Joe's bags, you know, that are the reusable bags as possible for the environment. But when COVID went into effect, I got a great supply of these because we couldn't use our own bags. And I use the inside because the outside's probably been in the trunk of my car or someplace I don't want it to be. I feel the inside's a little safer. And then I just put them on this to cool before I wrap them up. And what you'll find if you do that is it leaves a big grease mark. I can tell if somebody has stolen a cookie before they should, because there's an empty grease. And I can tell you with my husband around, I find those a lot.
It's the animals, it's the cats.
Not our animals. And it's the big animal, the 2-footed animal. And, but the other thing is it absorbs some of the grease from the butter. And I think well, it doesn't make it any healthier. It just helps, you know, I think it's a little bit crisper on the bottom then.
Important.
Yeah. So those, you'll see me do that in about 6 minutes. Other than that, any questions? There's a chat down there, I see, Darlene.
Yeah, there is. There's no questions right now, but if you guys have a question, you can unmute yourself or type it in the chat box. There is nothing coming up.
Okay.
I do have, let's see, why do you sift the dry ingredients?
I think it's like, why do I mix it? Keep the mixer on. It mixes them better than if you put it into the dough and let the beater do it, because they have to, where's my sifter? Thank you. So they have to go through this fine mesh, and it also makes it lighter. So when something is asked for sift, I've tried to sift with a fork, like when I was with my niece in New York. She didn't have a sifter. So I bought her a sifter after I bought her the other stuff. But if you do just a fork, it lightens it up a little, but not as consistently as if it's in a sifter. And I like this sifter. There are different kinds of sifters. There's some that have a squeeze thing on the handle, but I find that tires my hand if I have to do a lot of them. This seems to be easier. So it's traveled around.
I'm lazy. I don't even sift my flour. I know that I should. Sometimes I'll put it through the thing. I do buy a baker's sugar though. I do like using baker's sugar when I'm baking or when I'm making lemonade because it's a finer grain.
Yeah.
So basically the reason why you're sifting your flour is just because it makes it, like Jeannie was saying, lighter and easier to blend all the ingredients together. Particularly if your flour has been sitting around for a while and it gets lumpy, you definitely want to sift it.
Now I don't sip the sugars. The sugars go into the butter to cream. But if you think about the way I scoop it out, it settles it in and it's denser. If I used it directly that way, it wouldn't be as light. So you saw, I don't know if you were able to see the pile, but the pile of the flour and the salt and the baking soda mixed together was probably about this high compared to what you would see if it was just 2 plops of this, 2.5 plops of that. So.
Yeah, and the measuring thing. So baking is more of a science, and cooking to me is more of an art. And they can be a combination of both. But cooking, that's where people are like, when you're making stuff and they're just throwing stuff in the pot and not measuring, the measurements are not as important. Okay. Whereas baking, usually the measurements are very important. It doesn't have to be exact. Like Jeanne already knows what she's doing. So she's like, she'll, be a little bit off on the vanilla or a little bit off on the flour, but they'll adjust it. What consistency your batter is supposed to be at some point. So that is where people mess up on baking, because if you don't know how to bake, you should really follow the measurements more carefully. Whereas cooking, not as much,
Well, and when you cook something like a soup or whatever, you taste it as you go along, and you're supposed to, and then you can add ingredients. With baking, you have to have all the ingredients mixed together and then put in the oven and hope that the oven is doing its job. You can't exactly taste it unless you take it out and throw it in like I did, because I forgot the vanilla, and then something else comes out as good, I guess. It was ugly. And so I think that's probably another difference, but you're right in the difference between cooking and baking. Our son, in culinary school, had to take a baking class. He just did not like it because he's very creative and he likes to fiddle around with stuff and see how different ingredients will mix and not mix. And whereas I'm more of a pretty consistent recipe follower, I'm not a chef. He told me I was a prep chef, not even a soup chef. I'm a prep chef.
Is that a compliment or an insult? I don't know.
I'll be your sous chef. And he said, no, you're my prep cook. Because he knows what he's doing and I don't. I'm a good cook, but I like a recipe. So this is probably why it works for me. It's like my recipe.
Yeah.
I have made oatmeal cookies. A long time ago, I made oatmeal cookies and I put chocolate chip cookies in them, but not the reverse of putting oatmeal in my chocolate chip cookie recipe. And I really probably have to experiment with that. So we have a story that my lovely husband, one day, decided that he was going to put some red wine in my cookie dough, and I was furious. Still, I'm furious.
3 drops. That was it.
3 drops.
Just a teaser. And oh my gosh, what a reaction.
Well, how did it come out though? Was it good or not? Or it wasn't enough to make a difference, probably. Huh?
I was like scooping it out. I was doing my cookies. Okay, there's the first ones to come out.
Wine is not something you normally put in cookie dough, I have to say.
Now, here's the challenge. When you take them out, before you take them out, you really have to look at them. And you can't tell here, but they continue cooking on the cookie sheet. Mm-hmm. So I like just a little tinge of brown around the edges. They're pretty light. I'm going to throw another batch in just a second.
I'll be over there in about 5 minutes.
Well, actually, Darlene, I'm going to drop these off at your house.
Oh, awesome.
Rob will get 3. So
not all of them, just
in our family, Rob gets 3. If I make 360 cookies or I make just one batch, he gets 3 cookies. That's it. And he'll show you his art of choosing them, which he has a certain art. So I take them out when they're just hinged around, and like all ovens, they cook differently in the back of the oven than they do in the front. So I go towards, I look at the ones in the back because they're the ones that's where the primary heat is. And they'll be tinged because, as I said, they are still cooking a little bit. And then I leave them on here for about 7 minutes. And then I put them on the paper sack, the cut up paper sack. And then I leave them there until they're cool. So you won't get them right away, darling, but you're gonna see. And hopefully your family will like them too. Your
Oh
folks.
yeah. Anytime today is fine.
Well, you're
I'm
such
not picky.
but every once in a while something comes off and I get to look at. I'm trying to think of what else. Rob was asking me all these questions ahead of time, like what about this and what about that, so I could remember. Were there any other things that you thought of?
I think you covered them all. I think the temperature is important of the ingredients. The
Versions.
the steps that you talked about. And I think the paper bags really make a big difference because it does soak up a lot of the butter. And so they're not too greasy or too filling.
Well, you put them on the plate too. I've never done that. I'm going to do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I just, again, it's one of those things that we've always done in our family. And so I've always done it. And when we didn't have reusable bags for groceries, I would always have this challenge: do I want plastic or paper? Because they take up so much space in your closets. And so it was, if I had a lot of cookies, I made sure that I got paper sacks at the store. But again, now we have so many of them from not being able to bring our own in.
Right, we're at 2:02 actually, so we're going to shut it down. If anybody has last minute question, but I think we're pretty good. So thank you. They're just saying thank you, Jeanne, for sharing. And then so I will put the recording up at some point in my life and do that. So thank you so much for sharing your recipe today.
Sure. Anytime. So
And thank you, Rob, for your camera abilities.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Thanks.
All
a lot.
right. We'll see you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you next week.
Where's my?